Exam Suite 7 maintained a steady atmospheric pressure of exactly 68 kilopascals. The overhead emitters held at a warm 3,200 Kelvin, a color temperature calibrated specifically to soothe the optical nerves of flight-prone herbivores. At the center of the room, a composite bite plate rested on a sanitized tray, engineered to measure the minimal jaw pressure required to puncture soft nutrient pods. 14 senior researchers of the Palathy Xenobiology Institute stood motionless behind the observation glass. On the central diagnostic table, Earth specimen 0041 cheerfully swung her legs. Her name was Hazel Trent. When Chief Researcher Solon Ide stepped into the chamber to initiate the skeletal density analysis, the human turned. She exposed her primary oral structures in a sustained, unprovoked display. The stark white enamel caught the amber lighting. The 14 observers documented the action simultaneously. A cultural greeting the preliminary planetary files had claimed. They watched a biped voluntarily bare its internal processing calcium to the open air. The initial scan anomalies alone were enough to trigger a departmental review. The data that permanently restricted the archives? That comes later. I'd adjusted the frequency of the acoustic scanner. The machine hummed, mapping the human's internal framework. The holographic monitors blinked yellow, then transitioned to a pulsing red. The skeletal density readout climbed steadily past the safety margins for standard-issue orbital armor. Recalibrate the emitters. I'd instructed her adjutant through the internal comms. The mass ratio is registering as synthetic carbon weave. The emitters are nominal, Chief, the adjutant replied, his auditory slits flattening against his skull, which meant the diagnostic software was completely failing. They were reading the density of a deep-sea pressure dweller inside the frame of a plains biped. The secondary diagnostic swept the muscular architecture. The masseter equivalent, anchoring the lower mandible, returned fiber density metrics suggesting extreme fatigue resistance. The human chewed constantly, the data implied, or possessed the capacity to lock its jaw against violent resistance. Hazel leaned forward, peering at the red flashing display with mild, professional interest. "Is it finding a cavity?" she asked. I paused her data entry. The translation matrix struggled with the terminology. A localized structural collapse in the cranial plating? A hole in a tooth, Hazel clarified. She tapped her own lower mandible with a single index finger. I fixed them back home. Fillings, root canals. We scrape out the decay and pack the void with composite resin. She offered Ida a sympathetic, clinical look, the exact expression a pediatric specialist uses on a frightened patient. "I could take a look at yours if you want. Free consultation." Behind the glass, 13 styluses stopped moving. The specimen was offering to perform reconstructive bone surgery on the chief researcher as a casual favor. "We do not reshape our calcium structures," I'd managed to say. Hazel let out a short, rhythmic exhalation. "You should see what orthodontists do. They reshape the entire bone alignment with metal wire." The atmospheric processors droned in the heavy silence. I'd looked down at the sanitized tray holding the fragile Class 3 nutrient pod bite plate. She slowly pushed the instrument toward the human. "We need to record your mechanical processing capacity," I'd said, her vocal nodes tightening. Hazel picked up the reinforced polymer disc. She examined the grooves, her thumb tracing the embedded sensor nodes. Without breaking eye contact with the chief researcher, she tapped her jawline again. "Just bite down, right? Open wide." Hazel held the Class 3 nutrient pod bite plate. She blew a microscopic speck of dust off the sterile polymer. Practiced clinical exhale. Then she placed the diagnostic sensor between her molars. The hydraulic resistance activated. A sharp, synthetic fracture echoed through the 68 kilopascal atmosphere. The audio pickup registered the crack of the reinforced disc splitting in half. The central display rendered the numerical output in blinding yellow across the main holoscreen. 162 pounds of force, equating to approximately 720 newtons. The 14 researchers stared at the raw telemetry, silently comparing the output against established galactic defense parameters. That specific metric easily exceeded the structural failure threshold for the standard-issue polyceramic personal armor of 11 separate cataloged species. This terrestrial biped possessed the localized mechanical capacity to splinter hardened combat plating, crush dense mineral shells, and shatter raw skeletal matter simply by closing her lower mandible. "Run the secondary check on her occupational data," I'd ordered. Her vocal nodes vibrated with a low, uncontrolled frequency. The terrestrial files on orthodontics populated the auxiliary screens. Diagrams of metal brackets anchored directly into living calcium. Tension wires designed to drag adult teeth through solid jawbone over thousands of solar cycles. It was voluntary, unanesthetized anatomical restructuring. Junior archivist Valen abandoned his console, backing slowly toward the reinforced blast doors. The primary classification changed from observation to restricted military, a protocol reserved for active biological threats. Emergency klaxons replaced the steady drone of the atmospheric emitters. The amber overheads shifted to aggressive red. I'd looked back through the observation glass. Hazel had removed the ruined bite plate. She looked up at the 14 researchers and stretched her lips back again. The cultural greeting. The assumption that a fragile biped was displaying a harmless evolutionary quirk evaporated instantly. They were staring at an apex predator casually bearing an integrated, armor-piercing weapon system. The waiting area outside Exam Suite 7 smelled of ozone and sterilized air. Hazel sat on the synthetic leather bench. A passing security technician hugged the far wall, his auditory slits clamped shut. Hazel caught his movement. The edges of her mouth curved upward. White enamel gleamed beneath the corridor's harsh fluorescent lighting. She slowly closed her lips, concealing the bone, and crossed her ankles.